Hello and welcome to CFUV's Climate Jam, a series on exploring technologies that can be used to combat global warming. My name is Jason Grenier, and I will be conducting a series of interviews with experts of different green sustainable technologies that you can use in your own home to combat global warming. Other technologies that can be used by large organizations such as schools, businesses, and cities will also be discussed, as well as how you can influence your community to take action against global warming. To kick this series off, I have on the phone with me Guy Dauncey, the founder of the BC Sustainable Energy Association and author of several books, including The Climate Challenge, 101 Solutions to Global Warming. Guy, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Jason. It's great to be here for the first show in your new Climate Jam series.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. To start off here, I'm not going to be naive and think that everybody knows what climate change is and global warming. So could you explain what climate change is, why it's important for everybody in the world to know about, and give some examples of signs that have occurred in the past few years that may indicate climate change?
Yes, for sure. So first of all, climate change and global warming are interchangeable. They refer to the same thing. And we're not talking about the weather. I mean, the fact that today it's hot and tomorrow it's cold and then it snows and stuff like that. We're talking about the atmosphere, which determines the climate, which then determines the weather on the smaller scale. And the atmosphere is very dependent on some key molecules which trap heat within the atmosphere, in particular carbon dioxide, methane, and some others. Without those molecules, we would be so stone-cold freezing at night and hot baking in the daytime. So the atmosphere and the greenhouse effect, as we call it, because the atmosphere enables us to be like inside a greenhouse, is absolutely important, and the greenhouse effect is absolutely important. But when you mess with the number of molecules that are trapping the heat, as we have been doing, you then trap more heat. And so in particular, by burning fossil fuels, which are really ancient stored carbon from 200 million years ago, when we release that carbon all at once in a sudden burst, I mean, I'm talking over 150 years, which is very, very sudden in geological terms, that increase of carbon in the atmosphere traps heat. And we know that temperatures are rising both in the atmosphere and in the ocean as well. Most of the heat is going into the deep ocean. And that is fundamentally the problem, because the increasing heat, as well as causing greater disturbances of drought, sudden tropical downpours, forest fires, and all sorts of things like that, it also obviously melts ice. And the Arctic ice cap, which has been stable for as long as, for ages and ages and ages, since the last ice age, is melting so rapidly that we could see the first weekend without ice in the Arctic in about 2 years' time. In mid-September is the apogee, and then in 20 years' time there'll be 6 months without ice. The Antarctic ice cap is also melting. Greenland is also melting. All around the world, glaciers are melting. And none of this is disputed. And so when we know that the melting ice is a direct cause of the increasing heat, both from the warmer oceans and from the warmer air, when it comes to sudden weather events like the massive flooding in Calgary, like the torrential downpour in Toronto that we just recently, we say that there's the fingerprint of climate change on them, or you're loading the dice that those events will happen more often. You can't ever say that any one weather event is caused by climate change. But if you're evaporating more water into the atmosphere because it's warmer atmosphere, there's more water to come down. And there's all sorts of things we're just learning about the way that the climate affects the jet stream, and the jet stream affects the weather. And there's things which scientists are just beginning to wrap their brains around, like why is it in recent years that the jet stream seems to have been stopping and staying stationary over a certain community for like 5 or 6 days with non-stop heat or torrential rain. And so globally, there's absolute huge consensus in the scientific community that climate change is real and it's caused by humans. When there was a a meta-study done of nearly 14,000 peer-reviewed climate articles published over the last 20 years that refer to climate change, only 24 reject the science that global warming is caused by humans. That's one study in 581. All of the rest are saying, yes, this has been caused by humans. And so that's when we lead to a radio show such as yours saying, what do we do about it? How can we change our technologies? How can we stop burning fossil fuels fundamentally?
And what you're talking about here is basically the scientific fact that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases trap heat.
Yes. Fundamentally. And no one disputes that. That's a sort of basic law of physics. They trap heat in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, the CFC gases, and water vapor. They all trap heat, yes.
Now, the scientist James Hansen from, don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, but Goddard Institute for Space Studies, he put forward that 350 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere is a safe upper limit to avoid a climate tipping point. Your book, which was written in 2009, mentions that we were at 389 parts per million. What is our current CO2 count, and what does it mean to be so far above?
So to put this in context, throughout the last 10,000 years, since the last ice age, the level of carbon dioxide has been around 280 parts per million. And as we started burning fossil fuels, it started increasing. And when I wrote the book, it was 389. This year, it just passed 400. And the scientists are saying that if we get up to 425 or, 450, we may not be able to get this genie back in the bottle, because when it's up to 450, that we're going to have a guaranteed 2-degree increase in global temperature. And all of the changes we're seeing so far, which is the imminent meltdown of the Arctic and stuff, is caused by less than 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature. So we're on, because of the increasing level of CO2 in the atmosphere and the increasing methane, we're on track for a temperature increase anywhere between 2 and 6 degrees. So, the consensus is maybe around 4 degrees by the end of this century. And to put that in context, the last time the world was 3 degrees warmer, the sea level was 25 meters higher. Not inches, but 25 meters higher, which is the height of an 8-story building. So that's, and it won't all happen this century. It takes a couple of hundred years, but once it's happening, you can't control it. And so that is why those of us involved in climate change look at this thing and go, holy shit, we've got a big problem we've got to deal with. We need a rapid change away from fossil fuels into renewable, sustainable forms of energy.
Well, now that we know a bit about climate change, let's talk about solutions. So many people think of smokestacks and car exhaust when they think about causes of global warming. Your book, The Climate Challenge, explains how different parts of the Earth's land naturally absorb CO2, and I'm just bringing this up because I find it interesting. If this land is not managed responsibly, that land will not absorb CO2, and it will also contribute to global warming. Your book talks about solutions. Could you talk about, for instance, the farming industry and forest companies?
Carbon, there's a natural carbon cycle. So, there's carbon in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The plants breathe it in. It's absorbed in their roots. The plants breathe the carbon in and breathe out the carbon dioxide. And so in forests store a huge amount of carbon, both in the root systems and the soil and the trees themselves. And whenever you cut down a forest in our part of the world, say has a natural 300-year life cycle, and you've shortened it to 60 years in order for timber cut purposes, you are diminishing the carbon in the soil and in the forest. So the way to get back to store carbon in the forest is to replicate old-growth forestry as much as possible while doing commercial forestry. And that's already being done in various places, and they get better yields of timber that way. So it's perfectly commercially viable, but it means you have to have a long-term investment horizon and not just a short, get the money out. Because if you cut the trees immediately and put the money in the bank, you can get 15% on it. whereas the forest is growing at 2 to 4% is natural ecological growth rate. Same with farming. Organic farming, because it is increasing the amount of organic matter in the soil, and all organic matter is carbon-based, organic farming stores more carbon in the soil. So the more we can return to organic farming, the better we're going to get. Regular conventional farming really treats the soil like just a medium that plants can stand up in, and have to pump the fertilizer in to make it work anymore because there's so little nutrients left in it. And the same actually goes for grasslands. I mean, there are ways of managing the grasslands that if you mimic the way the grasslands were when the wolf was around, the wolves used to cause the cattle to cluster for safety together, and the particular way they clustered means that their hooves impact the ground in a very dramatic way. They all pee and shit in the same place and manure the ground, and the seeds get caught in the divots where their hooves are. And the roots of the native grasses go up to 20 feet deep. When you take away the wolf, the cattle turn into delicatessen eaters, and they pick here and they pick there, and they scuff the surface, and they don't impact it in the same way. And the carbon gets lost in the plant. You get different plants establishing much weaker root systems, and you lose the carbon storage. And it's an area of this that's not spoken about very much, because people are more stuck on electricity and transport and stuff like that. But it's an important area to understand.
And that brings me to my next question. I was going to ask you about, you talk about replacing vehicles that burn oil with electric vehicles.
Yes.
Could you relate this solution to Victoria, a city that gets its energy from hydroelectric power, and Halifax, which burns coal?
Yeah, I mean, when here in British Columbia, most of our electricity is hydro, and it's all indirectly solar energy because it takes the sun to evaporate the water to go up in the atmosphere and come down in the dams. And so when we make a change to electric vehicles, the electricity is thoroughly green. But in any jurisdiction, even if electric vehicles are burning 100% coal-fired electricity, they're still producing fewer emissions than if they're burning oil. The numbers have been crunched quite well on that. And we know that all jurisdictions are basically greening up their electrical supply as well. So there's less and less coal going to be burnt all the time. It's now illegal, for instance, in British Columbia to burn coal to produce electricity. And Ontario is closing down its coal-fired power plants. Many states in America are trying to shut down their coal-fired power plants. I'm not actually sure about Nova Scotia. So it's a definite benefit to move to electric vehicles and to bicycles, electric bicycles, transit, more walking, more car sharing. There's a whole little family of solutions that actually can enable our personal and small vehicle transport to be 100% free of fossil fuels.
Yeah,
with today's known technology. It gets trickier when you get to trucks and flying and stuff like that, but for personal transport and small trucks, we can do it right now.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point to make. It's a family of solutions. It's not just one solution.
Yeah, I mean, people who jump on, say, one solution saying, we can't all drive electric cars, no one's ever saying that. We need to get... I mean, cycling is by far the most cost-effective solution. In Copenhagen, 35% of all people are riding their bicycles to work on safe, separated bike lanes. And if anyone who's listening has tried an electric bike, you'll know that when you come to the hill and you just switch on the electric drive, you sail up the hill as if it's on the flat. So you can even live in North Vancouver and happily get around on an electric bike without being absolutely exhausted and muscle beaten up every single day.
Next question, I find this very interesting, and it's extra interesting because of what has happened just recently. I would like to talk about sewage waste and the energy we can create from it. Recently, the CRD paid $30 million to consultants who came up with a plan for a sewage treatment plant, which the CRD hoped to build on Viewfield Road in Vic West.
Yes.
The engineers came up with a plan to build a system that would produce 1.8 megawatts of renewable energy. The net amount after the treatment plant has used its own energy is 1 megawatt. If you divide that number by the 250,000 people that live in the system, that amounts to 4 watts per person, which is no energy solution at all, especially for a $2 billion project. Could you explain how we extract energy from sewage waste?
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue with any engineer studies because I trained in sociology, not in engineering. There are two kinds of energy you can extract from sewage. One is the methane gas, as sewage actually breaks down and produces methane. and the other is simply the heat. Using a heat pump technology, you can transfer heat from the warmer water of sewage water and extract the heat and run a heat pump with it, ideally to heat nearby buildings. And that is being done, for instance, in Vancouver's southeast Falls Creek. The electricity, as I understand it, is driven really only by the available methane. And you're talking laws of physics here. So if a plant can cover its own power production and have some extra, that's pretty good. You can't suddenly expect sewage to be a hidden source of power, on a much larger scale. And then you've got to look at the complexity of the different designs and the locations and stuff like that. So it's a complicated field, but it's certainly other jurisdictions, especially in Scandinavia, always extract energy from their sewage treatment processes.
I wasn't sure about how efficient that type of energy extraction is.
Yeah, I couldn't comment. It's not very efficient as compared to other things, but it's better to get what you can when you can.
Okay, that sounds good. I'd like to talk about getting involved. A large portion of your book and, of course, your website talks about getting involved. Could you talk about your organization, the BC Sustainable Energy Association, and what the roles of its board of directors and regular members are?
Yeah, I founded the BC SEA, BC Sustainable Energy Association. Our website is bcsea.org. I founded it 10 years ago specifically to become a focus for practical, workable solutions to the climate crisis, as opposed to saying stop this, stop that, and being opposed to things. It's a voluntary non-profit, so it has a board of directors who govern its affairs, and it has a staff. And we take on specific projects. So we have one project called the Climate Change Showdown, which goes into schools, elementary level, and does a whole module with them, which the kids go and have a contest to actually reduce their own emissions by changing their behavior at home. And we've reached around 54,000 school kids so far through that program. We ran another program for 5 years called Solar BC, really doing a lot of work to encourage more solar hot water systems. And we're now about to tackle the issue of retrofitting condominium buildings, persuading the strata councils to take the vote to retrofit their buildings and save energy there. And we do a lot of policy work, engaged with government, trying to argue for the best policies all the time. And we have 4 or 5 chapters around the province when volunteers get involved and really use the BCSEA set of solutions and visions and determination to dream up their own projects. So our chapter in Kamloops, for instance, is just now, for the second year running, wrapped up its solar laundry project, because the hot air dryer uses a lot of energy. It's one of the most intense energy users in the house, and the sun is out there shining for free. So get a laundry line, put some sunshine in your pants, as they say. The chapters take on projects like that, and they have speakers, and they get together. It's a good place for people to get involved, but we don't say what the volunteers should do when they get involved, because volunteering is really about finding the secret place where your heart finds something you're excited about, and you dream up a project that's exciting that can get some traction. But I do believe that it's really important for all of us to find a way to get involved in some way or other, whether it's around sustainable energy, whether it's around sustainable farming, whether it's around getting to know the neighbors and building community with them. That's how we make our world a better place. That's so critically important. If we don't do that, there are other people out there quite happily pursuing goals of more profit, and thirdly, more profit, and come what may with the costs. And the cost is always the environment and social benefit. And so even if you're in business, finding a way for that business to become a socially responsible business and become a B corporation and change your goals as a business, all of these things are important. They're all covered in the book, The Climate Challenge.
Yeah.
And the book and my personal work, I mentioned the website for the BCSEA, which is bcsea.org. My personal website is earthfuture.com. And my book, The Climate Challenge, is theclimatechallenge.ca, or you can reference it through my website. But this thing of taking initiatives, such as you are doing in starting this radio series, I know you're working as a volunteer in this too, these are hugely important steps. If we all get engaged and find our passion in some particular initiative of this kind, then our world becomes a better place, because we start really ramping up the effort we produce.
And you were mentioning something about profit, people who want to take advantage of our land if we don't do something about it. So that leads me to this question. When you get involved in the fight against climate change, you are basically fighting some very powerful organizations. meaning organizations with a lot of money.
Yeah.
Many speakers, activists, authors that are worried about climate change accuse oil, gas, and coal companies of some very shady activities.
Yeah.
In your book, you state that the coal and oil industries are financing PR campaigns to speed confusion about climate change.
Yes.
You also state that the coal and oil industries have cooperated to obstruct progress of partnerships trying to fight climate change.
Yes.
I imagine that these corporations go to great lengths to hide what they are doing, but what proof do you have to make these statements?
Yeah, well, first of all, I shouldn't have said profit, profit, profit. I should have said profit without limit, profit without limit. I mean, every business needs to make a profit. I'm self-employed myself. I need to make a profit. There's nothing wrong with profit. It's profit at any cost. This is the problem, the cost of the environment. And so the big oil companies and the big coal companies have been taking this a whole step further and saying, if climate change is going to be a risk to our business, we need to make sure people are confused about it. And so ExxonMobil are openly, funding groups like the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, giving them big chunks of money to fund climate denial scientists and climate denial websites. And there's a British website called ExxonSecrets.com that actually lays out in great detail all of the financial transactions. They use it to, both to fund the climate deniers and to attack legislation. So, for instance, they fund a group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And ALEC actually writes extremely right-wing legislation. So they've recently drafted a bill that would require teaching climate change in schools to be based on climate change denial. And they're funded by Exxon. Another group in America, the Koch brothers, who are two brothers who really own a lot of coal industry stuff. They, channel a lot of their money towards climate deniers and towards members of Congress in America who then become climate deniers. And here in Canada, we have a group called the so-called Friends of Science, based out of Alberta, who've been, persistent climate deniers, and they're funded by Talisman. And the evidence for that is on the website Desmogblog, DESMOG blog, desmogblog.com. And you've got very competent researchers who dig into the finances and find the evidence and see the checks almost, to see the flow of money. It took a lot of digging for them to find out that Talisman had actually funded the Friends of Science, because exactly as you say, they want to hide this. But there's enough people concerned about the underhand activities of some of the major oil industry and coal industry companies to dig into this and find the evidence that, yes, they're the ones funding the climate deniers.
Yeah, I guess to find the truth, you got to follow the money.
You've got to follow the money, exactly, yes, because it's the money that pays for the people to organize the climate deniers. They all get fees. They get speaking fees, they get research fees for coming up with totally spurious things, like it's caused by the sun or it's caused by volcanoes. And, all arguments that have been disproven time over and time over. There's no doubt that it's fundamentally humans causing climate change by our increased carbon dioxide emissions, from burning fossil fuels, from destroying rainforests, from undermining carbon in the soil, and things like that.
Okay. That's all the time we have. We're approaching 30 minutes. Is there anything you wanted to say?
The flip side of all this is that I really am a great believer in the future. I'm a great believer in civilization, in nature, and in life itself. I'm just totally in love with life. And I'm in love with the process of being alive and of what humans can achieve on this planet. I'm a great believer in progress, even though it might seem out of fashion. And the challenge of climate change is simultaneously a challenge to make the leap to sustainable forms of energy. The fossil fuels that we're using are absolutely old-fashioned, archaic bits of energy that are 200 million years old. They're all going to run out. If you look, any period of time ahead, whether it's 50 years or 200 years, they will be gone. And then you've got to ask the question, okay, so how do we make do for energy as a civilization? We're bright, we're smart. The sun gives us 10,000 times more energy every day than we're consuming as humans. And so the sun indirectly drives, also it drives wind energy, it drives hydropower, it drives geothermal power, and drives solar power itself. So making that transition to sustainable forms of energy is a huge civilizational jump that we have to do with or without climate change. And the climate crisis simply puts the foot on the accelerator and say, you've got to do this really fast because we are heading for a cliff right now. And if we don't turn this thing around, we're going over. And there'll be the level of sea level rise and of climate disruption such that impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. But, we still have time on our side, so if we move fast enough and work on this thing.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that's a good way to end it. We got hope, and I'm definitely excited when I think about and read about the things that we have. So
every day there's something new. Just today in Wired magazine, I saw a piece about the new Volvo electric vehicle. It's a hybrid electric. And normally, the solar energy strike in a car is only enough for 10% of the electric drive. So they've designed this new system with an unfoldable solar pack that sits in the trunk of the car, and you can unfold it, and it unfolds like a butterfly above the car to gather much more solar energy anytime the car's parked. I thought, whoa, why didn't I invent that?
Yeah.
There's so much creativity out there for this new future.
Yes, excellent.
That's the good news.
Well, thanks a lot for your time.
My pleasure, Jason.
And I definitely will keep in touch with you.
Yes.
Okay.
And good luck with the series.
Okay, thanks a lot.